Welcome to AskPsychSessions, where we ask some of the best teachers in psychology questions from you, our audience. If you would like to send in a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions, all lowercase, no spaces. And here's our next question. This is Ask Psych Sessions, and I am using a new program that allows me to talk to my friend on the other coast. Hi, Marianne.
Hey, Garth. How are you?
Hey, good. Marianne Lloyd from Seton Hall University. You're a cognitive psychologist.
That's correct. I do research in memory.
Perfect. Because I have a question. I had a student who emailed me this morning, and this is a student who's been in my class before, a different class. Actually, I think I had her for Psych 100, and now I have her for biopsychology, and she's aiming to be a psych major, and she really wants to do well in the course, but she, well, let me just read this for you, and maybe I shouldn't read it. That might be identifiable. So let me just say what she what the email is asking about. She's saying, listen, I'm spending the 15 hours a week on the course, essentially, that you ask us to spend. I'm getting the readings done. I'm getting the homework done. However, the amount of work I'm putting into the course is not reflecting in my grade. And so I am contacting you because I want to succeed. I have been doing retrieval practice and space practice. And I'm hoping that you might have some ideas or something that could help. So I just feel for this student who is trying really hard and not getting the grade that she wants out of the course. And so have you experienced this before? And do you have any things that you talk to your students about just in general?
I do. So I think the first thing is that it's a good sign that she's already listening and thinking about things like space practice and retrieval practice. So what I would probably want to focus the student on is what the nature of that is looking like. So if it's retrieval practice where this person is generating their own, say, flashcards, I'd want to look at those and see if I can figure out if they're maybe focused on the wrong things. Without knowing how you test students, it's not very helpful to just memorize definitions, for example, if they're going to need to compare and contrast on the exam, because you're not retrieving in the same way during practice that you'll be retrieving during the examinations. So that would be my first thought, is that they're doing the right things, just perhaps in the wrong way. Same thing with distributing your practice is great. I might have a question about the level of attention that's happening. So I certainly space out a lot of my writing, but my writing sessions can sometimes also look like checking social media and looking at email at the same time. And we know that when we do task switching, that doesn't really help us have strong intentional encoding. The other thing that I would think about that's sort of out of my area of expertise is maybe actually just test taking strategies. So the student maybe is talking themselves out of correct answers. So some quick things I always tell students to do is when they get their tests, if they're allowed to write on them, jot a few things in the margin that they were holding in working memory. Don't look through the test and start with the stuff you feel more confident about. Some more strategy as opposed to memory effects. But I would start definitely with looking at the way the retrieval practice is happening and see if that's consistent with the way that the tests are asking for information. Has there been an exam already?
There has. I think this student bombed the examination that we had in the course, and it's it's a multiple choice exam. But I think what this student is really focusing on right now is some of the writing assignments,
Okay.
and her knowledge just is not translating to accuracy, or her studying is not translating to accuracy. And I agree with you. I think the next step for we get this question from time to time just as instructors, and I think the next step is, what do you mean by spaced and space practice and retrieval practice? And finding out if her definition of those things aligns with what I think would be beneficial for her. So I really like that advice. Am I understanding what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that is a good thing to work on, and couching it more in terms of metacognition. Can
Yeah.
the student recognize what they understand and what they don't understand? And that's, I find, extraordinarily difficult of a skill for students to foster and develop. But maybe sit down with that exam, if she's kept the materials, to sort of compare those answers with what was made for prepping, or look at the rubric for the writing and look at what the output was, so that they can start to understand where the disconnect is happening. But that is sort of the hardest conversation to have, I find. It's one thing when a student just comes in and has done everything on my list of don't do these things if you want to do well. It's much harder when they come in and they've done the suggestions that I have, and we have to figure out how to tweak good ideas. They're also at least not resistant to evidence-based techniques.
Right. One of the things that I wonder about, and maybe it applies to this situation, but in general, is like preparedness of college students. And I teach at a community college, so I'm not sure how this relates to where you're at. But sometimes when I say to students, and I think it's Rice University that has a kind of a calculator of how much time students should be putting into each class based on. It helps instructors kind of create assessments and allows you to determine how much time a student will need to put into your class to do well. I think that's what I'm trying to say. It's hard for me when I have some students, the students who are just going to be fine in every college class they take. They just have it. They get studying. They understand it. And then there's other students who have to try really hard. And when I say something like, hey, I'm on quarters. Hey, you are going to need to put in 15 hours a week in this course in order to, be above a 3.0. And that student says, hey, I'm like working my butt off. And I can't get to that grade that I want. I'm not sure quite what to do with those students, except to say that for you, this might be 20 hours a week for a while.
It might be 20 hours a week, or it might be a case of retooling what you're doing during those 15 hours. If you're trying to sit down and look at biopsych for 4 hours, your attention is going to wane. So I definitely teach students about the Pomodoro technique, where you do 25 on, 5 off, and after 4, you take half an hour. We talk about the primacy effect there, that you're giving yourself more primacy effects when you take breaks. So I think that, as I alluded to earlier, I think sometimes that many hours isn't just looking at the material. It's probably a combination of other things, and procrastination, and looking at the words on the page, or using bubble font to color in your flashcards. These are all things I've done to extend the amount of time I'm working that aren't necessarily the most effective. So maybe a conversation about quality of work in addition to quantity of work would be helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, I wish I had your training. This all sounds good.
So I can tell you the analogy that I use in my classes in case it's helpful.
Uh-huh.
I put up a half marathon training plan on the first day, and we sort of talk about how most of them could do. Yeah, I like running slowly. The first week of a half marathon plan, you have to do 3 miles Tuesday, 3 miles Wednesday, 4 miles Friday. And so most of them will agree that if I let them take walk breaks, and they can take as long as they want, most students agree that they could do a 3-mile run if they needed to. But then, what we sort of talk about is that I think for some of us with our work, we are tired on Tuesday, so we don't do it. And then on Thursday, like, something happened, we forgot an assignment was due. And now suddenly Friday, we're facing a 10-mile run. And for most of us, we're not in the shape to just hop up and run for 10 miles. And your brains are really the same way. They aren't in the physical condition that they can do a 10-mile worth of biopsych at once. And it's hard to get yourself, because you can't go backwards in time, but to the extent that you can get yourself to do those short, easy runs as they're scheduled, you'll be much better off. You'll get a lot more out of it. And you might get up and run the next week. I would predict if you just try to do 10 miles after running 0, you're probably not going to get to week 2 on the training plan.
What's so interesting about that metaphor is that if I was to get together with just a random group of people and say, let's let's start training. There are going to be people who are just because of all their experiences before this, they are going to find the training easier. And so I think that's the variance that we have in our student populations when it comes to preparedness. And so that's now a new challenge, which is how do you take students who are maybe at different levels of experience with good study techniques, and how do you teach a course to all those students?
I mean, I am honest with my students that I am not teaching for the right tail of the distribution. And so, I'll talk to them a little bit about overlearning, and even if they're doing well, they'll probably retain this information for longer. But my goal is really to teach for the people that need a little bit more help. That's my job in the classroom. Just like if I was out going for a run with my students, like some of them, they're not going to wait for me. They're going to be off doing their 7 and 8 minute miles while I'm enjoying my 12. So I think that I'm transparent about it in the class, I guess, is what my answer is. And I think if those really strong students want additional work or they want to have conversations, I encourage them to come to office hours. I'll take questions and talk about things, at a more in-depth level if they ask, but always while couching and saying, I'm going to answer this so that we have a better understanding of, the theory behind this construct, but I don't expect you to know it because I want to be conscientious of the anxiety for the students that aren't as far ahead in the class. I think students have a sense about where they fall. So I want to make sure that, in general, the most vulnerable in the class are the ones that I'm concerned about.
Okay, one final question, Marianne. Who is writing about this kind of stuff for teachers? And I know Steve Chu's video or doing other things for teachers, because what you're saying is so helpful to me right now as I'm dealing with this student and thinking about it. And I'm not sure where this is, these ideas, except that lots of us in our little bubbles kind of read something, in Signs of Learning or whatever, and then we think, how can that apply to my classroom, my student learning experience? But is anybody just kind of plainly writing about this stuff?
So this might be a bit of a stretch because I'm trying to think about how I came to this. I think her name is Sarah Rose Kavanaugh. I believe she's at Assumption. She had a keynote address at NITOP in 2018 or one of the breakout sessions. And she talked a lot about the cycle of learning and emotions in the classroom. And that really made me stop and think about how much I needed to consider that before I could move on. So I would suggest she has a book about this that I think would be helpful. I did not read the book, full disclosure. I saw the talk, was compelled to make some considerations.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, maybe our listeners, when they hear this, if you want to get onto Twitter or whatever and post any resources for these kinds of great ideas for how to respond to students and how to teach study skills to students. I know a lot of it has been done and a lot of it's out there, but just the way you explained it, I really appreciate it. And I think our listeners will too. So I could probably talk to you for a long time, and we should sit down and do that. But we try to keep these short. So thanks for your time.